Hi, Dr. Crystal. I know water is a big part of healing and just overall wellness. I mean, we are made up of water. 70% of us is water. And I would like to know your perspective of water, and maybe you can share some interesting information.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me back, Jesse, and for asking such a beautiful question about water. So, water, you're absolutely correct. We're mostly made of water. The entire world is mostly made of water. And anything that has life has to have water. And so, just that principle alone really intrigued me to learn more about the nature of water itself. As I started exploring and learning more about what water is not just made up of in its components like hydrogen and oxygen, but as what is hydrogen itself? What do these bonds really do? And I went down pretty deep in understanding the physics of hydrogen itself or oxygen itself and how they relate to one another. And that's the really big importance here is the relationship between hydrogen and oxygen and the bonds that they make and the geometry that they make. And so that was one of the biggest, most significant lessons that I learned about the nature of water was its physical components and what they encompass and what they're actually made of themselves and how they bond together and relate together and the shape that they make. And as energy from the universe flows and it flows through that geometry, it's what gives rise to life itself. And so, understanding all of these different principles and what water does in nature and how it flows and the intelligence of nature, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute, has brought together the very foundation of what I offer here in my clinic at Integrity Wellness. So, the structure of water, just the chemical structure of water, H2O, that never changes despite its state. And so that's super fascinating because if you take anything else and you change its state of matter, any other chemical composition, or solution, it does change the chemical nature of it, where water doesn't. And so that's really important for us to understand because it is universal. It never changes, even though it changes its form. So, from solid to liquid to gas to also plasma, which is the fourth state of water or fourth state of matter that has emerged over the last maybe 5 years of research by Dr. Gerald Pollack, who's one of the biggest researchers in that area. And that really leads into when you understand these universal principles, they're truths. They're truth 100% of the time for 100% of the people. And when we start there, that's really important to me. So that's why it's such a foundational part to my practice now, my art that I practice. So the nature of water itself, when you really get down to understanding not just its chemical composition, not just its bonds and its physics or physical nature, not just it in nature, but its intelligence. So there's work that's emerged and research that has emerged over the last number of decades, but it hasn't been well understood and it hasn't been well explored until recently. So there was a Japanese professor, Dr. Emoto, who did some early pioneering work with frequencies and freezing water, and then looking at the crystal and crystalline structure from those frequencies and its influence on the water. And you could notice a very discernible changes and beautiful harmonic and coherent patterns with frequencies that were very pleasant and even joyful or happier emotions and intentions versus frequencies that were maybe more frustrated or angry emotions or heavy metal music or something that's a little bit more distorted in its own nature instead of being so coherent. And it absolutely changed the crystalline structure of the water when it was frozen, and so it altered its state of matter and its expression. Not many people understood that. And there was criticisms about his work that it wasn't reproducible. And so what's really fascinating today is there are many water researchers who have taken his earlier work and other work of, say, Viktor Schauberger, who's another early pioneering water researcher, and they've used their principles and they've standardized them into a way that can be studied very scientifically using the scientific method and controlled for all these variables so that you know that the only effect is actually from the water itself. And one of those water researchers is Veda Austin. And so I learned a lot from her in the way that she standardized a freezing method and exposed water to all sorts of various different information, pictures, images, a seed even, her own finger. And the results of the freezing expressions were always reproducible, and they were always exactly mirroring back to her what she put into the water or exposed the water to an information. And it was fascinating to see that she videotaped exposing water to a seed. And a seed is pure potential, right? So let's take an acorn, for instance. It wasn't an acorn, it was some type of flower seed. But the seed itself has 100% of potentiality to become that oak tree, as the acorn is the example, right? So the seed itself has all of the potential information, but it's not yet actualized in expression. So when the water was exposed to the seed for 30 seconds and then frozen using her standardized scientific freezing method, it expressed to her the flower of the seed itself. So it showed her, it taught her what was the potential that was in that seed. So that tells me the absolute stunning brilliance and sentience of water itself without a human mind attached to it, right? And so that is absolutely 100% needs to be explored more, and we need to understand that more. And so in these principles, I have actually been using those principles in my application of water as a potential therapeutic option, and hydrogen specifically, and something else called Brown's gas, or HHO, which is oxyhydrogen, which is basically the plasma water, fourth state of water. I'll talk about that in a moment. But in the application of learning and understanding the principles that I've learned by exploring water, its intelligence, its structure, its nature, its function, and its own intentionality, it actually reflects back its own interpretation of what you're supplying it as an informational input. And if your body is mostly water, which it is, your body has intelligence just like that water that we're looking at freezing inside of you, running through you, involved in every cellular process, involved in every enzymatic process. Every single event of your biological living life occurs with water involved. So I take these deep fundamental principles and then I apply them, and I help my clients and members really understand what their body is composed of and how intelligent their body is just from water. When I talk about the fourth phase of water earlier, that is also what Brown's gas or oxyhydrogen, or there's many names for it, but we call it Brown's gas here. And that is a very fundamentally structured, highly structured water that's so structured and organized and coherent that it's almost crystalline and gel-like in its nature. And it's completely different and completely separate from regular H2O. And it does have extra hydrogen within it, and it does have extra negative charge. So electrons, other people will call. And so when the circumstances in nature are perfect, which are usually, you can find this type of water often at the bottom of a waterfall, for instance. All of your blood vessels are lined with this pristine, intelligently structured, formulated biological living water, plasma water. It has such an enormous function and role to play. And when we pay a little bit of attention and put a little bit of effort into that part of ourselves physically, we get dramatic improvements and results in different parts that we may have been lacking for energy or for vitality in our lives. And it has profound improvements on various different conditions or ailments that people come to me explaining that they have these physical expressions of.
Every time I come to integrity and I drink the water, I immediately notice how good it tastes, number one, and how good I feel after drinking it. And I just want to know, since here you call it magic water, and what is it about the water that is magic? Is there anything added to it, perhaps removed from it? Is there a special process that it goes through? What makes it such a key component to the practice?
That's a great question. At Integrity Wellness, we again have this fundamental basic function and focus on water as our beginning place, because it's really where life starts and it's really where all life requires us to start. So we create what we call magic water, and we call it magic water only because of my children, to help them understand a little bit more that this is specialized type of water that we like to drink. And it is hydrogen enriched, or infused, I should say. So there's nanoparticles of hydrogen that are infused into distilled water. And distilled water we start with because it's a blank canvas. There are no parts of anything in it. It's been filtered, it's been essentially steamed and purified. And so you're starting off with purified water. If we had the capacity to be somewhere where we had a spring, that we had access to spring water, we might use that as a different option, but we don't have that super local, and so it would be too onerous for us to be able to access that. So distilled water is, again, a blank slate. We know there is nothing in it, that it's purified, and then we add what we want to the water, the information that we want to the water. So we want lots of hydrogen, because those bonds, that first element of life is so vital. And it carries with it the potential for it to be able to relate with oxygen in such a way that it creates that form, geometry, and energy can flow through it. And the space between each one of those water molecules is where all of the potentiality of the universe really lies, which is hard for people to wrap their head around, but I really understand it well, and I'm in awe every day of just that little structure. So when we infuse it with nanoparticles of hydrogen, it holds within the water, and it really holds the strength and the integrity of the structure of the water from there. And we also infuse it with Brown's gas. And Brown's gas, remember, is that plasma water that's lining your blood vessels and your lymphatic system. And really, that's where the charge, the energy, and the ability for that, the flow to come from. And so we infuse it with hydrogen, Brown's gas, and then we also infuse it with other information or expose it to other information because we understand the intelligence of water and its ability to capture and hold information within it. So we also imbue it with infrared light. We imbue it with certain vibrational frequencies are known to be healing, which are called the solfeggio frequencies. And that also helps to really provide a highly coherent, structured water, which is precisely what living biological water is. And so it becomes very energized, it becomes very structured, it becomes completely purified and full of life again. And so we know everything that's in that water, and we know how your cells will respond to it. And we know how it can be used in a therapeutic manner for each and every person based on whatever it is they're coming with a different expression of. And so it's tastes better because of the nature and the quality of the water, which is super important. Again, when we think about living beings such as a human, we are quality beings. There's nothing about us that is measurable to the degree that you could understand us through, right? Same as water. We can't understand it quantitatively. We can understand it qualitatively. And that's been so lost out of science, the qualitative studies and qualitative nature of understanding, which is really, I think, part of the shame that we've lost so much and so much connection to what we're studying because we think everything is basically quantifiable and you can reduce it down to its parts, but you can't. Each person is more than the sum of their parts. Water is more than the sum of its parts. And we see that so clearly. And that's what fascinates me. That's what inspires me. And knowing the quality of the water that we're helping people to consume is absorbed by their body better. It helps to detox and kick out water that's no longer properly shaped, no longer properly structured, no longer properly functioning, but your body was holding on to it because it's all it had, and it had to utilize it until it had something better, right? So basically, when you think about how you would build a building, right? The scaffolding and the foundation is first. And that's what water is to your body. It's the foundation. And so when we continuously supply it with the integrity that it requires, your body will be able to communicate properly. It will be able to signal properly. It will be able to respond properly and interpret everything properly. And that's really how I think we find health and vitality and well-being.
Yeah, that's amazing. It makes me want to only drink this magic water because every time I do drink it, it just feels so much nicer. Whether it's in the early morning or later in the day or before bed, even it just it makes me feel very good. And knowing what the process behind the water is also part of that as well. I actually am kind of curious if let's say like this is probably the best water you could probably find anywhere really, and how does that compare in terms of how your body absorbs that and how it hydrates you and how it allows your body to function perhaps on a cellular level or in your organs even.
Mhm.
How does that compare to the opposite, let's
Mhm.
say bottled water or worst
Tap
comes to
water.
worst, yes, tap water.
Mhm.
Like how does magic water compare?
So again, when we are looking more at qualitative nature of things, we don't have the numbers that somebody might want to be presented with in terms of percentages wise or something like that. But we have done a number of different tests on our water, and the um, the amount of intentionality and the amount of attention that we pay to the quality of our water is I think beyond anything anyone else has been willing to really put into their water. And so when you take something like tap water or even bottled water for that matter, there are a number of different bottled waters that we've tested that are quite shocking in terms of how bad they are. We've looked at hydrogen concentration of our water compared to various different hydrogen generating cups and things like that. And there's absolutely zero comparison whatsoever. Ours blows everything out of the water. And the reason that it does that is because, again, it's if you can see the hydrogen bubbles in some of these other generators or ionizers, that's not a nanoparticle, so it's not infused into the water at a nanoscale. It's a macromolecule, and those evaporate and dissipate very quickly. And so then you lose whatever extra hydrogen you may have gained quite quickly, whereas ours, you can keep it basically for, well, it's shelfable now because we have this other plasma device. So that we use not all the time, but sometimes. So the quality of the quantitative nature of the hydrogen, which is so beneficial again for every part of your foundation. You need that hydrogen for repair, regeneration, for structure, for scaffolding, for all of it. And for cellular structure and cell wall building and the ability for current, electromagnetic current, to be able to run through. That's how signals and information travel in the body, and how it speaks to itself is through electromagnetic and vibrational language and frequencies. And as it does that, and the water is a huge component of being able to transmit and interpret and all of the functions of, think about when we're communicating with one another. Our cells do the same thing, but without English, they use electromagnetic energy and vibration. We have to listen, right? We have to receive. We then have to interpret, and then we have to kind of decide on next steps and then send the signal out. Your cells all have to do the same thing, microsecond to microsecond, right? And that form of communication is really where your health comes from. It's the interface. And so when you drink magic water compared to tap water or bottled water or other hydrogen ionized waters, the quality and the amount of information that we have imbued into it and the quality and nature of the water itself is so bioavailable. It kind of cuts through everything because it's more gel-like. So it's not H2O, it's H3O2. And so it cuts through even your gastric acids, and it goes right to the lining of your stomach where it's absorbed, and then it's taken right to your bloodstream, and your body knows just based on polarities where something is needed right away. So it has a very fast, super intelligent system of knowing where needs repaired right now that's vital and the most priority and needs the resources right away. And so it takes it and it does that right away. So you'll notice, you may have noticed when you drink this water, that you do in fact void quite a bit at the beginning because your body is kind of getting rid of any of the water that it doesn't need anymore, that it can't utilize as well, and it has replaced with the bioactive, bioenergetic magic water that we create here at our clinic. That ability for your cells to be able to receive it, not only externally, right, outside of it at the extracellular fluid, but it also will go directly intracellularly because it's required inside of the cell when there's an imbalance in anything inside of the cell. And that's where it's really, really important. And that requires the phase angle, which is about the structure and and shape, geometry of the water molecule itself, and the electromagnetic energy that it has associated with it. So that's why it actually can get intracellularly, and it can repair, and it can kind of recalibrate the intracellular fluid, which is absolutely essential for life to be able to continue. It alters that back to its signature state, basically. Its balance, its dynamic equilibrium, and that provides it just through the water and drinking the water. And we actually also inhale Brown's gas and hydrogen as a therapeutic modality at our clinic as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And it just makes me think like this water is doing a lot more than just hydration. In fact, it's hydrating me more than any other water could. And what I think is most fascinating is how it has information stored within it. And I actually want to ask you more about the concept of memory in water. And you mentioned before the different geometric shapes and with structuring and the reflection of when we freeze water over an image.
Yeah.
And I noticed myself putting this water onto my face when I had a bruised eye, and even I guess I did a procedure on my nose, and I noticed some quicker healing. And that's because of some sort of memory that water seems to have. And you spoke a little bit on that, and I was wondering if perhaps you can tie that into how does this water remember for the sake of better health?
That's a great question too. So water has shown scientifically to be able to carry memory and information. And there is a physician and Nobel Prize winner, Dr. Luc Montaigne, who actually took over the scientific study of this work, Water Has Memory, from, I can't remember the gentleman's name. Anyhow, he took over his lab and he took over this work, and he completed numerous studies. And I'll just summarize the studies so that we can understand how they determined that water actually does have memory itself. It carries the information and never loses it. There is a documentary. It's fabulous. If anyone wants to watch it, it is, I believe it's just called Water Has Memory. And you can kind of type in Luc Montaigne. I can even give you the link and you can post it with this. That would probably even be better. But it is really fabulous. And it's been a while since I've watched it, so I may not get all of the details correctly. But in summary, they had a lab in the United States, and then they also had a sister or kind of accompanying lab across the world. And I can't remember what country it was in, but it doesn't really matter. But it was across the world. They took samples of DNA and they put those samples of DNA into tubes of water, and they diluted it to such a significant degree that it was not detectable in those samples. And what they did was they told their counterparts across the world that it was ready for them to pick up on their end. They sent the information. They only sent the information from each of the vials and each of the dilutions and its final dilution through the computer, through the internet, to the other lab. And then the other lab picked it up and they just used their own water from that country. And when they tested those vials, they were able to find the DNA within their own water. So it brings to mind this current emerging concept in quantum physics called entanglement. And there's also another concept called the unified field theory. And so that basically is telling us that we live in a universe that has a substrate background that is completely 100% connected. And water is part of that fabric. And it's water itself that actually carries the information and is entangled, which makes sense, right? If you think about the ubiquitous nature of water and water molecules, it's everywhere and in everything. And so it would make sense if I was the creator of the universe, I would want to be sure that I had some way of having a source that could transfer and transmit not only quickly, not only efficiently, not only part of the time, all the time, universally, instantaneously available at a distance. And these are truths that are just now being teased apart and understood at the highest academic and intellectual levels through quantum physics. And the idea of entanglement is that you can have one particle or atom that has some information or some exposure that will incite the same particle across the world to have the same information, and it's testable and verifiable. And so that unified field explains that scaffolding of water can explain how that entanglement happens. And so it's been fascinating to kind of learn about all of this, and all of the connecting information is always with water. So the documentary I'll send to you, it's super fascinating. And I would recommend everyone watch it, because it's not just about how water carries memory, but it's also about understanding the nature and the value of water as a being, instead of just kind of how we look at water as being just an inanimate, objectifiable thing. It's not a thing. It's an incredible being if we actually are being honest and truthful.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I imagine here with the storing of information with frequencies, red light, the hydrogen, the Brown's gas, it just makes me think if someone were to make a transition where they were only drinking this water,
Mm-hmm.
and that excludes any, I guess, other types of water.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps you've made that transition yourself. What would they experience? Like what is the first things they would notice, and
Mm-hmm.
perhaps where does it go from there?
Awesome. So I have made the transition to, by and large, drinking only our created water. I do drink coffee outside of water, but other than that, I don't consume any other substances or drinks or juices or anything like that. But I can't live without my coffee. So the water itself, if you are to switch to drinking hydrogenated water, our water, specifically because of the amount of information that's imbued into it, you'll notice, I would say first and foremost, that it tastes differently, that you don't feel bloated after you drink a whole glass of it, that your body uses it right away because you'll pee a lot in the first, I would say, 2 weeks, if you are going to transition over to just drinking this water mostly. That's what happened to me, and my personal lived experience is there were times where I was running to the bathroom minute after minute because my body needed to. When you give your body the raw building blocks of life and it's able to completely change itself back to its signature, right? Like think about your thumbprint. It does something very transformative. And it's just like healing, it's not always going to be pleasant or comfortable or pretty or enjoyable. But after the 2 weeks, I went right back, and it was very noticeable, very sudden. I went right back to my normal, voiding patterns. And I noticed very dramatically that my energy levels were much higher, much higher. My body felt like it was kind of tingling, and it was kind of pinging, almost like really communicating. The clarity of my thinking was so much better. I was sleeping better. My skin was radiating. I had no blemishes. I had no, the odd time I get little patches of eczema or things like that. I get nothing. And I've actually had instances where I've used the water topically and with gas infusions on my dad's knees, for instance, where he had psoriasis, and within a month completely cleared up. And I think really what this brings me back to is a sense of being alive again, a sense of really feeling like my body is thriving and it's enjoying working together and expressing that joy just from the the living nature of the information that it's getting consistently now. And that's the other thing that I've really noticed about the body, the human body, is it doesn't take very much, but it does take consistency. So just like anyone who's ever been to the gym, you know that after your first week of working out, you're not going to be, in at the outcome of the physical expression that you want to show off, right? But if you kept at that for 3 months, for 6 months, for a year, you'd be getting closer, closer, closer. You may actually have met your goal, whatever your goal is. But it takes consistency. And so again, I bring it back to the idea of showing up for yourself. You can make small changes that will have huge, dramatic influences and impacts on your physical body. Not just your physical body, your mental clarity, your mood, your psychological health also depends on your body's ability to be able to communicate properly too. And so the small, consistent efforts that you make for yourself are going to result in enormous, true changes, not just little fixes, but true changes. And I think that's what almost everyone is really looking for. Nobody wants a quick fix that's going to be temporary. But people struggle showing up for themselves consistently. So, I challenge people to just change the water that you drink. Just do that one little thing for your body and for yourself and see what you notice, because you will notice something. And it's not just me that's saying this stuff. If you even just look up the scientific and medical literature that's available on people that switch to even just hydrogen water and drinking that exclusively, there are phenomenal changes of all sorts that people have studied scientifically, and they are reproducible, and they're lived through people's experience here in my clinic too every day.
That's fantastic. And I have so many other questions I want to ask you from what you've just mentioned. It makes me think, if I feel like a lot of people are going to want to make this transition of drinking exclusively magic water, even for like 30 days, like a challenge or something. That could be really fascinating. But I definitely notice that when I drink the magic water, like serious mood improvement. I just feel ready to go. Like it just feels nice. Um, and I feel that it can make a huge difference. If you're very consistent with this water, you'll probably never want to ever go back, I imagine.
That's what most people do actually, in fact, say. There's been a lady who's recently started with us, and she's never drank a glass of water in her life. She drank, she drinks coffee, she drinks lemonade, she drinks all sorts of other options that are, you know, full of different information, let's say, right? Full of sugar, full of additives, full of chemicals. And your body is taking in all of that and it has to make sense of it. And none of those are building blocks, right? None of those are being used at the cellular and subcellular level. And so when we look at just the difference of what that change could make. And so she's been coming, I think, for this is her third week. Maybe it's still fairly new, but she now craves the water. She now doesn't want to drink anything else. She bought herself a little bottle of iced tea that she used to drink, and she can't stand the taste of it now. So it does completely change your physical nature. The intelligence in your body is saying, no, 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 we don't need that. We don't want that anymore. It's not what's right for us. It's not what's good for us. And it's actually expressing that to the person, and the person is realizing it. It's fascinating.
Yeah, I can only imagine how much better she probably feels and just how much healthier she has become
Yeah.
because of that small but significant change. I'm just recognizing the time, and I think I'll ask just two more
Sure.
questions. The first question I'm going to ask, and then I'll let you answer, is there's a lot of research lately that's, I guess, trending. It's hydrogen water and the benefits, and of course we discussed a lot of the benefits of hydrogen water. But what kind of studies would you like to see done with water science in regards to health and wellness?
That's a great question. So one of the things that I've always really wanted to be able to show people here in my clinic, which I haven't had the ability to do yet, is to actually show the electrical conductivity of water, because there's a lot of electrical properties to this magic water and to your biological living water, the plasma water that's in your body everywhere, that's moving everything. And so to understand how water can move through your blood vessels, through your extracellular fluid into the intracellular fluid with the electrical conductivity, to me, would be invaluable. And there are surrogate measures. So there are some of these scales that measure through a surrogate measure the electrical conductivity, but it's not actually the electrical conductivity from the extracellular fluid into the intracellular fluid. And what is it? What is that balance and how does that happen? I think it would be really valuable, because what we're learning a lot in that's kind of emerging a lot is the idea of cells that have that every cell needs a negative charge in order to be healthy. And so if we can find out how charge flows into the cell, and how do we maintain that, and how do we change that gradient if we notice, a sign or a symptom, we might be able to get on top of these things quicker from, a medical perspective. So that would be one thing. And I think the other thing that really fascinates me is because I know how water responds. I know how water interacts and interprets. It's like this other living being, but it's not other, it's us. I think it would be really fascinating to understand the impact and the influence on our body's water from things like arguments, or moments where you're sitting with someone you care about and you don't say the things that should be said, or these 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 moments where we know, you can feel it inside of you what's happening, that it feels like everything's twisting and turning. What's happening to your water, to those hydrogen bonds? Are they breaking? Are they disintegrating? Like, what is happening? Are they being poisoned by chemicals? Are they being eroded and broken down? And do they reshape and repair themselves, once that has settled? and what are the positive influences and what are the negative influences. And we do understand what those things are just based on what we feel. But I think because the world is so visual, being able to show an animation or a visualization of what happens to your body's water when you have negative thoughts, or when you're shaming yourself or you're shaming another person, what's happening in that person's body as you're shaming them or blaming them or manipulating them, right? And I think it would alter human behavior so dramatically. I'm just not sure that how to study that, but if I could just come up with a study or something that needed to be studied, I think there's so much to explore and there's so many different avenues to be able to take. There's even studies that have been done, and I forget the two brothers that are studying blood and how the blood can show you, so through the plasma, how it can show you its own anticipation of future events that are about to happen. And water, which is something I hadn't mentioned yet, but water does. So Veda Austin had put her thumb into one of her water samples that she froze. And when it came out, there was a cut in her thumbnail and her thumb. And that she didn't know what that was from or why that was there. But hours later, she cut that exact spot on her thumb. So it not only read the future event, right? But like the potential that was about to happen. And there are signs and evidence in our blood and plasma of our blood and the cells of our blood that can show an event that's going to happen, like a fracture that's about to happen days later. And so these are things that are emerging. And I think because of what we are learning about water has memory, water has this insane, incredible intelligence that is far beyond our own intelligence, to be honest, right? We should be looking at exploring these potentials to be able to use them in application in medicine instead of sitting back and dismissing them or arguing that there's something that's not real about them. The emerging science in quantum physics is absolutely definitively proving that these things are occurring in water: memory, information travel and communication, instantaneous action at a distance. These are fundamental, and we need to understand their nature and their application better so we can use it more effectively as tools for human life and thriving, and instead of otherwise.
I can only imagine one day a comprehensive literature review of can water be the sole entity to healing or
Right.
optimizing or anything, even from, I guess, a mental health perspective. And you did mention before how um, the structure of the water changed when exposed to certain frequencies like
Mm-hmm.
sounds. And we know that plants are the same way. So I imagine there could be a way. Now, one last question for those at home who, of course, I'm sure one day they can definitely purchase some magic water.
Mm-hmm.
But for those at home who, let's say, of course, don't have the resources or the tools or the technology to make this transition just yet into magic water,
Mm-hmm.
what are some practical tips that they can do with their water that can make a pretty significant difference in their life?
Right. Great question. So, always tell anyone that I'm talking to, because I'm always talking about water, you start with what you have and what's available to you. And there are some very simple, very, easy tricks and tools that you can kind of utilize to enhance and optimize the quality of the water that you have. So again, I always look at quality and not quantity because we're qualitative, we're quality beings. And So if you have tap water, then use tap water. But think about that is the same sentient being as any other water, as magic water. It's just different. So you can improve the quality of that water that comes out of your tap just simply by, again, understanding the nature of water. Water loves to move and spiral. So if you have like a frother at home or even a blender if you want, I think a blender is a little aggressive because, again, the nature of water is usually pretty gentle, especially when you want to improve the quality of it. But spiraling it, stir it in both directions, because bidirectionally, water flows and eddies and currents all the time. And so that will structure the water to be more ordered and more coherent in its vibrational pattern or in its molecular bond pattern, is really kind of what's happening there. But when you give water what water needs and water loves, water is going to respond back to you with an improvement in what you need and what you want. So the whole idea of life is there's reciprocity. And so that's what that piece does. So spiral your water, use a frother to spiral your water, even just use the cup itself to spin it around, and it loves to move. Water loves to be cold. You don't have to necessarily drink it cold. A lot of people don't like cold water. And cold and warm water do different things in your body. But water loves to be cold. So either after you've spiraled it or after you've moved it, chill it. Before you drink it, spiral it again. It's going to restructure very quickly because it already has more of a coherent structure. Filter it or purify it any way that you have the potential to do that. And then to energize water, right? You don't have to necessarily have this fancy equipment or any kind of fancy anything. You can simply put your water outside. If there's birds chirping, if there is light, if you can see your finger, there's light. All of that information can imbue into your water, and it can improve the quality because it's part of the same field. It's part of the same nature. And it will imbue those bits of information into the water that you're going to then drink. And then your body will also receive, again, in reciprocity, the benefits of just putting it outside, right? It can also, if you put it in UV light, it can give it a little bit of added purification if you're, kind of concerned about being able to filter it properly. But you can get infrared in the morning, in sunrise, and in the evening at sunset. And they're different bits of information on a spectrum that do different things, activating versus relaxing. So think about kind of the information that's available or that's presented to the water and how that water might respond. So those are my simple tips and tricks. And I was just away up north, quite far and remote, and we had spring water. And so it was quite lovely. And every single day I was doing those same actions myself to the water I was drinking there because I didn't have access to my magic water. I was gone for a week, so it was too hard. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And it reminds me of when my grandmother would put jars of water in the sunroom, and then she would always give those jars of water to her plants, and she claimed it would help the plants more. And I guess based off what you're saying and the fundamentals behind magic water, there is some truth. She knew some stuff,
She definitely
and she
knew
had
some
an
stuff.
amazing garden. Thank you for this discussion, and I'm sure a lot of people that might be listening would like to improve their water consumption situation, or perhaps expand their knowledge just like you continue to do every day. I forgot to ask you last time, where can people find you and perhaps more of your information or your content that you share.
Right. Perfect. So you can find me. We have a website, integrity-wellness.ca. And we also have an Instagram channel. We're fairly new and we're building these things. So stay tuned because there's going to be content coming out kind of probably like wildfire shortly. And as we build, we're going to have a YouTube site. We just haven't started it yet. And we have a Facebook page that's not quite yet up. So I'll get you that information later. But for now, website and Instagram channel are where you can find us. And if you want to contact me or connect with me, info@integrity-wellness.ca. You can send me an email, general inquiries or specific questions. And if you're interested, you can always come and check out the clinic. We're located in Barrie, Ontario. And we can give you a tour, and we always, kind of end up talking for quite a long time about what we enjoy to talk about here, which is, physics-based, the nature of things, deep reflections on everything, the connections between, I call it pan-disciplinary kind of inquiry into all of the, natural phenomenon, if you will, of the human body and the universe that we're in. And so we're located at 41 King Street, Unit 5 in Barrie. And our phone number at the clinic is 249-888-1359. And so we welcome phone calls and questions and any interest that's generated from somebody who's genuinely open and curious and wants to know more and wants to learn more about how they can help themselves holistically and naturally, based on very new principles. Well, they're very old, but they're new to modern civilization. And it's really fascinating and really inspiring. Mm-hmm.
I envision one day you're going to have endless phone calls. You're going to have to get a whole team of people to answer calls for you.
Mm-hmm.
But thank you for today, and I guess we will wrap up there. I'm going to drink some magic water, and till next time.
Cheers, everyone.